So you've been writing code for a while now, and your code is getting longer and more complicated. And one ramification of that is that you're not able to figure out what's wrong with your code immediately. Sometimes it could be running and then just getting the wrong output, and you don't know why. So you add print statements, and you follow along the code with your finger to try and figure out where that issue's happening. But those two things are not enough to figure it out, and so you're lost. Now I'm here to tell you that you have found the light. You will not be lost for much longer, because generations of programmers before you have had this same exact issue, and because of that created a debugger. Now a debugger takes those print statements and that finger following of the code and sort of does that process for you, where at any point in the code you can see the exact values of all of your variables. And so today we're going to be learning about the debugger that exists inside of idle and general components of what almost all debuggers, depending on any text editor that you're using, have. And so the first thing you're going to want to do, though, is enable line numbers, because the debugger is going to tell you where you're at in your code using line numbers. And so to get to the preferences window on Mac, I'm going to hit Command, comma. You can also go to idle and then preferences up here. And then Windows, I believe you'll have a menu bar at the top of your idle window that says options. And so if you go there and then click general and then check right here where it says show line numbers in new windows and then click OK, the next Python script file that you open will have line numbers. And so now that you have that enabled, the next thing you're going to want to do is in your Python shell window, not the editor, but the shell, you'll see in the menu bar, you've got the word debug. And so if you click debug and then click debugger, it'll say debug on. And in my other window, which I will now drag over, I now have this debug controller. And so this is going to give us all the information about those variables, where we are in our code, what's currently running. And now we can get started with actually trying to debug some code. And so one thing that I forgot to mention, but is worth mentioning, is that the line numbers, I believe I read, are only available for idle for Python 3.8 and up. I don't know if that's completely true, but regardless, now might be a good time to update your Python to the latest version so you can benefit from seeing your line numbers. And so now to show off some of the other tools that are available to us, if you run this code again, or if I run, I guess I'm doing it. If I run this code again, and then instead I click step, it will just execute line 2 of the code. And you can see that now we've got this message variable defined down in our global variables, and now we are on to line 3. Now line 3 has not run yet, but as soon as I click step, it's going to run it. However, because print is a function, it is running other Python code. And so because I have source checked, I actually now have this other file with the source code, some of the source code of the print function in Python. And so this is the code that the print function runs, and now we're debugging that. And if I keep clicking step, you'll see it'll keep taking me through and taking me to deeper and deeper function calls inside of our stack. But we want to get back up to this line 3, and if I click this, you'll see that everything is still intact here. We want to get back up to there in our actual code. We don't really care what's running in the print statement. We know it works, so let's get out of there. And I keep saying this out word, and that's convenient because the word out is right here. So if I click out, you'll see it'll take us up to the next level in our stack. And then if I click out again, you'll see it takes us to the next line. And we'll get rid of this. But that is one ramification of having source checked. It's going to show you all of the source code when it's helpful and when it's not. So occasionally you might want to uncheck it for that purpose. But now you can see that learning has indeed been printed, and now we are on to line 5. And if I step again, I now know that if I click step, it's going to take us into this print function, and we don't really want to do that. So I can click this button, which is over, to go over it, and it will completely run the print statement and take us to line 8. And again, I can click step, and it'll take us to this print statement, but then to use the last button that's up here that we haven't used yet, quit, if I click quit, it's not going to run this code, and it's just going to end our code execution early. One thing to note is that in the Python shell, now that I've clicked quit, you'll see it still says that all of these variables are defined, and as a matter of fact they are. So if I type message just to get the value of what message is and then press enter, sure, it's going to tell us that we're running quote line 1, which is just the word message. But if we step past that, then you'll see that everything is still defined. So that can be helpful too, just for tinkering with your code at random points, if you think that will help you debug your code. And so now that I've shown you that, I'm going to pull back this curtain of line numbers and reveal that we indeed have more code down here that doesn't work, as noted by this comment, and we're going to try and figure out why. So I've defined this function, num is palindrome, which accepts a number and then tells you whether or not it's a palindrome. An example of one would be 121, which flipped backwards is also 121. And so the first thing I do is I convert this to a string. I convert this number to a string, and then I reverse that string. And then I check if the string number is equal to the reversed string number. And if it is, then it is a palindrome, and then I return that value. So again, I can run this, and let's comment out this code as well. I can run this, and if I run this, it will take us through. Sorry, I gotta press run in here. If I run this, it will take us through line by line in our code, starting with this function definition, which actually doesn't run anything. So if I click step, it takes us down to line 21. It will take us through line by line and help us debug our code that way. So if I keep clicking step here, it'll take us here. And since now num is palindrome is going to run, when I step, it takes us into that function call. And you can see that now we're running in here, and there's this local variable num, which has been accepted into the function. So now you're seeing an example of there being some values in locals and some different values in globals. If I keep on stepping, you'll see that as we go, we can see exactly what's happening in our code. So string number is indeed a string version of our number. Reverse num, when we click step, we'll find out what that becomes, and we'll see that it's 0. And so actually this code doesn't work because it takes this line of code is taking the final indice of our string number and just assigning reversed num that value. What the correct thing to write here is colon, colon, colon 1, which is telling us to step through our string in the reverse direction. If you are interested in that, you can check out our video on string slicing, string and array slicing, which explains the syntax of all of that. But I'm not going to go over that too much in detail here. And so now if I keep on stepping, you'll see that we go down here back to our for loop and step again, and it takes us up to our for loop. The value of x changes. We now run num is palindrome with this 101, and we can keep doing this for every single value. But one thing to note is, even though I changed this code here, and in fact I did save it, the code hasn't changed inside of our debugger. And that can be a little bit misleading when every single line is getting highlighted, including these new lines that are being added. But in order to actually debug new changes you've made to your code, you need to completely restart and run that code again. And you'll see that now when we step through here, when we get to here, the string number is 100 and the reverse string is 001. And so our code is now working. But what if we've got an issue that's only happening on maybe number 150 of this for loop? Well, do we want to click and keep stepping through? And as you can see, that's, and I gotta click over because we actually hit the, or out because we hit the print statement, and keep going. You know, it's a very cumbersome process, stepping through this code line by line. And so fortunately, there's something to deal with that as well. And that is what is called breakpoints. So I'm gonna quit this and stop that execution. And now if I right click on a line, you will see that it says set breakpoint. And if I click set breakpoint, it will pause our code when we hit that line. And so that is helpful because now if we run our code and click go specifically, it will run until we hit this line. And so see, we actually got down to this for loop because x has been defined, and we ran num is palindrome x, and we hit this line, and so now it's paused. And if I click go again, it's going to keep going again until we hit this breakpoint. And if I keep clicking go, we can keep going and changing the value of x. And if I want to check specifically what x equals 120 is doing, I can now step through and be at that exact point in the code and get all of our variables that are being assigned to num is palindrome for that value. And you know, I can keep doing this over and over again. And so this is great because when you set breakpoints, you can jump exactly to that place in code and see what those variables are at that point. Here's some tips though for setting breakpoints. Sure, I set mine right here, but one great spot for a breakpoint is actually the return line of a function. Because now when I run this, you'll see that if I click go, it's going to run and then stop right before we return is palindrome. And so we get to see that all of our local variable, the values of all of our local variables here, and that can be really helpful for troubleshooting what exactly went wrong inside of a function. And this is much more organized than including tons of print statements for every single individual variable. So I can keep clicking go and keep stepping through, and you'll see all of my variable values are changing as it runs this function over and over again. And so that is awesome. One other great place to set breakpoints is on top of for loops. And so if I run a breakpoint on this for loop and I run our code, I click go, and it'll go until we hit line 21. And then if I click go again, then x will be 100, and y, since y is a global variable, y will be false. And if I keep clicking go, the values of x and y are going to keep changing. And actually, I may have mentioned, I don't know if I mentioned this before, but local variables, and I might be correcting myself, local variables are specific to variables that are assigned in functions and classes. I thought it was also for loops and while loops, but that is not the case. Anyway, if I keep clicking go, all of these values are changing, and this is helpful because since y is telling us what our value of whether or not our value of x is a palindrome, we can click through until we see a palindrome, 121, and see whether or not that was actually correctly identified as a palindrome, because y equals true. It is, again, only once I press step where the value of x actually changes, and we are now working with 122, and then we can run through all our code and see that y equals false for that. But anyway, those are the main aspects of a debugger that you want to use, and I think I've gone over everything now. So hopefully this helps you out in your code, especially as it gets larger. Definitely utilize breakpoints when you have very long pieces of code, because it's going to let you jump right to where you think the problem might be and see what every value is. But thank you so much for watching, and I hope I've helped you fix your code.